Liberal Viewer presents.
So when word leaked in October that JP Morgan Chase might pay $13 billion to settle state and federal civil bank fraud claims, Fox News spent a lot of time telling viewers how unfair the settlement was for the bankers who engaged in the fraud, but somehow forgot to ever mention the nature of the fraud itself in the supposedly straight news story on America's Newsroom that mainly concentrated on how bankers were taking the blame instead of what made them blameworthy, as you can see right from the beginning of supposedly straight news anchor Jamie Colby's introduction here.
Taking the blame and paying up. The nation's largest bank is taking the fall for the financial crisis of 2008. It's a bad memory. And now JP Morgan Chase and its CEO, Jamie Dimon, reaching a deal with the federal government to pay a record $13 billion fine. Stu Varney, host of Varney and Company, joining me now. Stu, I want to ask you first where this leads. You know, a bank gets in trouble like this if it happens again in the future. But was the Justice Department determined to go after Chase?
In my opinion, this is an attempt to pin all of the blame for the crash on Wall Street and pin it on the banks as well.
So from Jamie Colby to Stuart Varney there, the story was all about bankers taking the blame rather than what they actually did. And in case it wasn't clear that the Justice Department suing these bankers works for the Obama administration, Fox News' Stuart Varney made that clear in the continuation of the story in this clip.
This is where the administration wants the blame to go. Not to the politicians or the regulators, not to them, no, straight to the banks. The numbers, Jamie, are flat out shocking. So far, big banks have paid out $137 billion in fines and settlements, and there may be more to come. That is a huge number. Remember, these banks already paid back the loan money, the bailout money, with interest.
So if the banks already paid back the bailout money with interest, how could JP Morgan Chase owe another $13 billion? Could it be because they committed fraud? Well, the closest this Fox News story ever came to telling viewers that the $13 billion pays to settle civil fraud charges is down in the Chiron here, though the Fox News anchors never mentioned it and never explained the fraud came from bundling up bad mortgages and selling them as good mortgages, even though Stuart Varney claimed to be explaining what happened in detail here.
Just look for a second in detail at JP Morgan. This latest settlement is for $13 billion. Essentially, much of that is payment for the sins of Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual. Those are two mortgage-related companies that the government wanted JP Morgan to take over during the crisis. So JP Morgan is being forced to pay up for the sins of companies which they took over in the past.
Now, if you look at the actual federal complaint against JP Morgan, it's clear the JP Morgan defendants engaged in a lot of the fraud independent of what the Washington Mutual and Bear Stearns banks did that JP Morgan acquired, but the whole argument that it's unfair for JP Morgan to own the liabilities of a company it bought was pretty thoroughly ridiculed over on a great Daily Show segment criticizing Fox News, CNBC, and others, where Jon Stewart made this point.
Oh, so you're saying, why is JP Morgan responsible for the liabilities of a company that they bought? Well, I guess because they bought the company. But if this is a new way you guys want to run now, all right, how about this? I owe JP Morgan Chase $500,000 on my mortgage, but I decided, you know what? This place. I'm just going to sell it for $50,000 and walk away with the money. And under this new system, the guy who buys it doesn't owe you guys.
And not only did Jon Stewart's mortgage analogy there make a lot of sense, but he also pointed out a few facts from back in 2008 that you can see here.
Problems you cause don't disappear because someone buys you. They're included in the price. You know who knew that? Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase. In 2008, he was asked about legal liability from buying Washington Mutual. He told investors, quote, any liability related to the assets will come with us. He even braced his company for it by setting aside a $28 billion rainy day settlement fund. And guess what? It's raining, mother. So it looks to me like this government settlement's $15 billion less than what Dimon thought it might be. I mean, the only way this settlement could get any sweeter is if it was tax deductible.
But the final tab could be down to around $9 billion.
That's because the majority of the deal is expected to be tax deductible.
Son of a bitch!
Of course, back on Fox News, viewers never heard about the settlement being tax deductible, never heard about the $28 billion JP Morgan set aside to cover the $13 billion settlement, and never even heard about the details of the fraud itself, instead hearing Stuart Varney's cover story about a politicized prosecution in his concluding statement here.
It looks like a heavily politicized prosecution in which Wall Street is taking all of the blame for the crash of 2008.
And complaining about Wall Street taking the blame without ever explaining what Wall Street did that was blameworthy is quite a piece of misdirection, as satirical conservative commentator Stephen Colbert pointed out in his parody of punditry in this clip.
You know, it's been 5 years since America was driven to financial ruin by, well, who can remember, all right? Let's just say it was Obama. Jimmy, throw up the president smiling in front of a poor family. Yeah. That feels right. The point is, it wasn't the banks.
And I think some kind of Jedi mind trick to get viewers to forget the bank fraud that helped create the 2008 financial crisis is just what Fox News was attempting there, but I want to know what you think. Can Fox News make its viewers forget the actual blame bankers have for the 2008 financial crisis? And beyond the blame, can Fox News and the other apologists in the corporate media really make their viewers feel sorry for bankers?
YouTube, you decide.